Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Heather Knoll, and I am the program coordinator at Sustainable Woodstock. Founded in 2009, Sustainable Woodstock is a not-for-profit community and environmental action and education organization. We exist to lead our communities through the climate emergency, empowering Woodstock and the rest of the Upper Valley to meet climate commitments and live sustainably through advocacy, education, and collaboration. And this event is a part of our Green Drinks series, and Green Drinks are social events to connect people and organizations who have similar interests in sustainability and climate change. And our next big event is our Earth Day celebration with Reverend Mariama White Hammond on April 23rd at 6 p.m. And I am going to go ahead and put a link to that in the chat in case you'd like to sign up to join us. I hope you will. And before I introduce our speaker, I'd just like to talk about our format for the evening. So we are starting with a presentation, and it will be followed by time for questions at the end. And we will be taking our questions in the chat. So to enter questions, just type them into the chat box at the side of your screen. And if you don't see the chat box now, go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on the chat button, and it should open up. And you can enter questions at any time, and we'll come back to them at the end. Now, I am excited to introduce you to our speaker tonight. Ben Fletcher is a volunteer with the Hartford Salamander Team, and the Salamander Team is a volunteer group that supports science research and education in the Upper Valley. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. I'll share my screen. So welcome. But this presentation is about an hour long. This is the second time I've given it, so we'll see how well I stick to the clock. Uh, we're going to be starting with just what we generally do as volunteers, as communicators, as organizers. There's behind the scenes and there's on the roads portions of this project, and a lot of ways to get involved. And the more hats you wear, the more appreciated you'll be as a volunteer. After that, we'll go into some ecology. Sort of this whole program exists because there's an amphibian migration locally. Every spring, hundreds of thousands of frogs and salamanders cross roads to get to their breeding pools, and thus we go out and help them. Where they're crossing, this is an interesting point because this presentation is for Woodstock tonight, and Woodstock is the least mapped area we have in the Upper Valley. So we're going to be leaning pretty heavily on that portion of the presentation, and that's going to be a big goal of the evening. And after that, there's really two portions of the how to volunteer on the roads. There's the how to be safe and how to be safe with the amphibians, and then there's the how to collect data, because uh, we work to prevent roadkill. That's goal one. And we also collect data for a community science project run by the North Branch Nature Center. The amphibians we encounter part is for a longer presentation, but if I talk as fast as I'm currently speaking, we might actually get to it. Yeah. We help amphibians across the road. We put on reflective vests and headlamps. Those are the two essential pieces of equipment. And we also do this in the rain, so you'll likely want to bring a raincoat. Uh, but yeah, we're scooping up frogs and salamanders, noting the direction they're pointing, and then carrying them that direction because they know which way they're headed. Please don't turn them around because they'll keep going where they're headed. These amphibians return to the same breeding pools each year. They are pretty fixated on a specific geotag that I don't believe science really understands how they are so attuned to, but Uh, they're very good at getting there, unless cars get in the way. Um, yeah, so to do this volunteering, you have to know where the amphibians are crossing roads. And we have a website put together, hartfordsalamanderteam.org. And on the right, this is a Google map that you can all edit and add points to. If you add a point, please color code it and organize it. But as you can see, we get so far as Queechee and then not really any further west than that as far as points go. So if you know of any spots where you can remember seeing frogs or salamanders, uh, please try to get them onto that map or send it. You can send an email and I'll do that stuff for you. But ask your friends, ask your family, where have you seen frogs on the road lately? And this project exists because we have some good role models. Uh, we started back in 2020, thanks to a presentation that a local group called the Vermont Center for Eco Studies put together. They invited a group called the Harris Center. The Harris Center is down in Keene, and they've been operating amphibian crossing brigades for, I think, 3 decades at this point. And Brett Thalen visited. She spoke for an hour describing their program and convinced the whole room that it was a fun way to volunteer and you should definitely get involved. And we all got really excited. And then she dropped the conclusion, the closest group to you is an hour away in Keene or in Montpelier. So we all left frustrated and then made the Hartford Salamander team. Uh, The Harris Center's in New Hampshire, so we had to find a group that was willing to work with us and our data. And the North Branch Nature Center is about equidistant from them. They're up in Montpelier. And for the last 4 years, they've run our training for us. They still to this day organize our data, and I'll be describing a data sheet later that is from them. And uh, all of our volunteer protocols and all of the science we do is guided by their models and protocols. So we have a lot of thanks to give to them. And uh, if you ever meet Sean or Ash in person, uh, they're extremely big salamander people. I think Ash is the most knowledgeable about blue salamander like genetics and breeding ecology of anybody I know. And like the word kleptogenesis appears in blue spotted salamander. Klepto in a breeding context is as surprising as it sounds, and you should go Google it after this. But yeah. So in addition to helping frogs and salamanders cross roads, we do community science. Uh, what this actually looks like is walking down a specific section of road, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And each time you make a transect, you're completing a data sheet on the number of amphibians observed and the total cars noted and some general conditions. I would recommend, if you're Googling anything this evening, the North Branch Nature Center Amphibian Road Crossing website is as resource rich, and uh, it has a link to a presentation that is even more robust than I'm aiming to be this evening. And they have a volunteer manual, and uh, they have short videos on amphibian ecology as well. So if you're just curious about the species you'll see, check out their website. Their website is also how you add the specific road crossing points, and their map. Uh, every time you submit a data sheet, their map live updates. So make sure your spot is on the map so that your data can go through the magic portal of becoming part of the project. Um, Throughout the upper valley, we have that many points. The the blue spots are uh, likely unconfirmed or sparsely populated amphibian road crossings. And then the orange ones are pretty hot and they're confirmed and volunteers are actively stewarding them. And on the right, you see the North Branch Nature Center's ArcGIS map. And if you were to be on the map and if you clicked any of those points, you would see the total history of all the amphibians encountered there. I think you see the name of the person that is doing the bulk of that surveying. Uh, you can see all the data contributed by volunteers on that map. And hopefully within a few weeks, there's a little circle drawn around the Woodstock area. Maybe we'll spend time at the end of this evening just trying to together brainstorm some points. I know one time coming home from the Cloudland restaurant or Cloudland farm, I that was my first ever experience with a big night. And I had just eaten dinner and we were trying to get down the hill and we had to stop because the road was moving and we were very confused. And it's really unbelievable how many frogs you'll find on an active amphibian crossing. And that one was, I think, the most peepers I've ever seen in a specific 10-foot section of road. Uh, but yeah, I guess that memory 10 years ago paid off quite immensely. So thank you, Cloudland. Um, there's a goal beyond just getting points onto the amphibian road crossing map, which is to find a road crossing close to home. Any amount of traveling to a road crossing sort of defeats the point, or it bears a risk. That transit does carry a risk of causing amphibian roadkill. And so really, if you can walk to an amphibian road crossing, that's ideal. There are some that I'm going to make an argument are worth traveling to. They're remote. They have an immense number of amphibians. They have car traffic that causes roadkill that is consistent and reliable, and volunteers can operate safely and have a pretty large impact there. So um, the most significant crossings I call critical crossings because alliteration helps with marketing, and this is a big marketing project. Yeah. So on the right side, uh, the right side describes how to get a point onto the ArcGIS map or the data map. And that's a very important point that is quite evident once you're on the North Branch website. But please spend some time once you have a section in mind where you've seen amphibians and try to get it on the map. Why and when do they cross? It surprised me, but frogs don't spend their whole lives in ponds. I I expected wood frogs and peepers and all those things to just like reside permanently in the bodies of water around here. But no, they live in dense forests. And only for the first few weeks of in this year, it looks like it's going to be May. But the first weeks of the breeding season, they rush to their breeding pools, which are generally fishless ponds, uh, kind of flooded wetlands, vernal pools. But if you see any fish in a body of water, it's unlikely to have the amphibians because the fish will just eat the eggs. And um, you'll you might learn later that everything sort of enjoys eating and feasting on everything we're going to be talking about this evening. So yeah. Uh, so an amphibian road crossing looks like dense forest on one side of the road and then just water evident on the other. And this pictures of the Upper Valley Aquatic Center on Route 5. Part of the red line is Arboretum Lane, which that section really doesn't get much car traffic. The other part of the red line is on Route 5, which is a really intense section of highly trafficked wide road. And so this is actually the site that I'm going to describe as a remote location that needs special protocols and special consideration. But uh, it is worth volunteer effort, and the volunteers make a huge impact each year. So when do they cross roads? We're in the middle of April and we've had some of this. So if you go out to your local pools, you might see some frog eggs right now. That said, this amphibian season looks rather disjointed at this point. We've had, looks like a 2-week dormant section. Anyway, the two check boxes for when a big night could happen really are the temperature is above 40 degrees and it stays rainy such that the roads will be wet into the night. So it really has to rain into the evening, and the temperature can't really duck down. We say 40 degrees, 42 kind of guarantees some activity. At 40, you might see some frogs, but it'll be a trickle or just a lighter, slower movement, or a small night versus a big night. I try to send an email for the Hartford Salamander Team has an email list, and if you're on it, you'll get an announcement for the biggest big nights or when conditions are guaranteed. But the Harris Center has something that you should also Google called the salamander forecast. And that shows you the probability for 5 days. Yeah. But the next 5 days ahead of whether there's any chance of movement. And conditions change rapidly, and you can get very ready for a big night and then pull out your effective vest, and then at the last moment, everything changes and your plans dissolve. And the start of the season can be really frustrating in that way. And last year was like the most frustrating year of the whole stretch of this experience. And this year is slightly better. And um, but I think everybody's currently using that forecast on the team. It's the best tool we can recommend. If it's your homepage during the season, it'll remind you to keep an eye on the weather. Um, as mentioned earlier, they cross where roads transect the dense forests where they live and the breeding pools where they're trying to spend the April and May months. And um, if you know of any ponds or any just stagnant bodies of water in the Woodstock area, if you send those into the chat right now, I'll look those up after this presentation, and I'll see if they have a decent chance of being amphibian road crossings. But if you spend some time on Google Earth, you can actually do this scouting with technology. And pictured as Lily Pond Road, which is I a, it's a pond that likely does have fish, and yet that road has consistent, intense activity. And uh, in the whole project, that is the largest following and the most people show up to it because it's in walking distance of a dense neighborhood. But spend some time on Google Earth looking for anything that looks like Lily Pond Road. Uh, when we were putting our map together, we did all the Google Earthing, and then we sent people out to scout the locations, and that converted the blue marks to orange. And then we got lazy and stopped converting the sparser, the less, the spots with fewer amphibians just stayed blue because the volunteer need was lesser and it made sense to us at the time. But um, it's ideal to have a long list or a very populated map because then you can hopefully find a spot that's close to home and then you don't have to drive. Because as I mentioned earlier, driving, avoid it as much as you can. And also a totally valid way of volunteering for this project is just opting out of driving for the evening or not going to the movies on a spring night if the rain manifests after dark. And a lot of the posting we do is just it's raining, don't drive. And that's priority number one as far as where to put your energy if you're spread thin at this point in the season. Um, some crossings do warrant driving to, and if you have a populated map, then you can also map out routes to your road crossing that has a lower chance of having amphibians on the way. So the Upper Valley Aquatic Center is not next to any neighborhoods, but it's right next to Route 5. And Route 5 has the largest number of cars per hour of any route that or any amphibian crossing that we currently monitor. And it's the most intense and the most stressful and the most overwhelming or overstimulating of any crossing you can really opt for. And so I don't recommend it to anybody who's doing this for a first year. Um, if you have a friend that already goes there, it is a fantastic orientation to this kind of volunteering, and it'll train you on the skills real quick, and you'll handle a lot of amphibians. Uh, we're going to mention gear later, or what to bring for this, but at sites like this, you're going to want a bucket because there's a lot of amphibians and a lot of cars to look out for, and putting them in a bucket and then crossing the road is a safer and uh, a time-saving strategy that will also reduce stress and make it a more fun experience. Um, Lily Pond Road was shown earlier, and that still has roadkill and it still needs volunteers, but it gets a small fraction of the cars that this part does, and it's not a it's got fewer lanes. The whole experience is reduced and calmer and more relaxed and more fun in some ways. So there's a wide variety of experiences involved in this volunteering, and you can really pick the evening you'd like to have. Also, for this audience, I'll share that Arboretum Lane doesn't have any cars really, and you can park up at the Aquatic Center parking lot. That's where volunteers for this spot park. And if you safely navigate up there, then you do have access to Arboretum Lane, and that has no car traffic and it's covered in frogs and salamanders. So if you've got little ones or if you're looking for an educational evening of yellow spotted salamanders, wood frogs, and spring peepers, that is a good place to go. The Hartford Salamander Team is organized to contribute to the North Branch project, which is It's been going for 2 decades now, and it's formally titled the Amphibian Road Crossing Project. And to participate, you have to fill out a liability waiver. And so technically you can't be a Salamander team member unless you complete that waiver. So everybody should make a priority of completing that waiver. But beyond that, simply it's this is a fundamentally risky, or adventurous is the word I want to use, but it goes slightly beyond adventurous. This volunteering puts you out in the dark on trafficked roads. And so there's a degree of responsibility and a degree of alertness, and uh, it's important to keep alert, and however fun it is, maintain a degree of seriousness and be mindful of the risks involved. Because we also want to be welcome on the roads, and we want drivers to appreciate the effort we're putting into it. We don't want to bother anybody, and we want good publicity versus the bad kind. Um, Seriously, the best way to volunteer in this is just remind everybody you know to not drive on rainy spring nights. That's it's taken me a few years to realize how important that particular goal is. But if you're starting a Woodstock Salamander team, how about make that your mission statement? That does seem to be the most effective way to have an individual impact. Take to your listserv, spread the word. So this specific presentation is geared for the town of Hartford, and the Hartford Conservation Commission supports the salamander team effort, and they've been doing so for a few years at this point. And we have our email list is something like 300 plus people, and there are some folks involved. And if you have a sufficient level of organization, there's some more advanced, interesting things you can do to help amphibians. One of those is closing roads for temporary periods of time. And the Harris Center down in Keene, I think at this point in the year, they've already closed I think they only closed one road, and they've closed it 3 or 4 times at this point. And a map will be coming up with that. Uh, by virtue of closing that important crossing, they free up a dozen or so volunteers for all of the hours of that evening. And the volunteers go elsewhere and help amphibians over there. And then they also guarantee the safety of that whole section of amphibians. And if you can identify a crossing where a detour is possible and viable, uh, in Hartford, it looks like it's not often an option. And the one spot it looks vaguely possible is Lily Pond. And um, I'll be curious to see if Woodstock has any roads that, one, are critical amphibian crossings, and two, have convenient detours available to them. And I don't know if Woodstock has a conservation commission. I'd be curious if any members are here tonight, which I guess is a possibility. If any are, I'd be curious about starting that conversation early, or at least putting that option on the table. Because um, I guess the earlier you can get to that sort of organizing, the better, and the easier time you'll have actually cultivating community support and closing the road in practice. The road the Harris Center closes is not super convenient to make a detour around, but it has a lot of amphibians and not too much car traffic. So because of that combination, they were able to convince the community, and they beyond convincing, I think the whole community just showed up and was in support from the get-go. But it also helps that the Harris Center has been a very powerful organizing force. Um, they've got news coverage for many, many years, and Brett is extremely responsive. So if you're looking to get more involved in the town of Woodstock, Brett's a great resource, and she'd be more than willing to sort of describe how this came to be for them. This, I hope I said this before, but this whole project is because of a great presentation that Brett gave. So go find Brett talking about amphibians somewhere. Highly recommended. Um, this slide exists to describe a sort of medium level, a medium difficulty amphibian crossing. This one is still on Route 5, but it's in a section that gets less cars and it's slightly narrower. So it's it has fast cars and a lot of amphibians, um, which results ultimately to a less stressful experience than the aquatic center. This one is also mildly remote, and so um, volunteers park at nearby parking lots. Uh, Another fun spot in Hartford, some people were doing this amphibian road crossing stuff for like decades before we got into it. And we didn't know about that until we had reflective vests on too. And then we encountered these people and they didn't know what the Hartford Salamander Team was. And they were just scooping up amphibians. Make friends with those people. And if you can hear their stories, then they're generally inspiring and it adds to the fun. Yeah. Meeting somebody by happenstance at this location put a lot of wind in the sails for this project, and very thankful for that. So I've mentioned most of these pieces of equipment, but the strong headlamp is essential. The reflective vest is essential. Uh, it's going to be raining. It's about 40 degrees, so a nice jacket is essential. Um, Part of the volunteering is counting the individual numbers of amphibians of each species. And we work on road transects. So we walk down the road and then up it again, and then down the road and then up it again. And each time we make that transect, we remove the roadkill amphibians that we find. And that's so that we can count from zero the next time that we do the transect without repeating any counts. And so one piece of equipment, speaking of that, is the spatula. Um, that is one of the more emotional parts of this whole experience, and it's quite challenging at first, and it's hard, uh, but it guarantees the quality of your data, and that data has a very significant impact for the conservation goals that we're working toward. So the data is worth getting, and I mentioned the bucket as well. I hope you find spots that you need a bucket for. That's really only necessary if you're being overwhelmed by amphibians, and that's most likely to happen on the first big night of the year. And likely it'll be spring peepers that cause that havoc for you. And lastly, the pen and note paper. We're collecting data, and I'm going to show you the data sheet, which you can print out, but you're going to be using a new data sheet for every time you walk up or down the road, which can total to quite a number of data sheets. Uh, so just a pen and a pad of paper, it's pretty easy to just make your own system, and we'll go into that in a short while. Uh, as for guidelines, there's often a tendency of folks to kind of flag down cars and try to communicate with the cars that first amphibians are there when volunteers are around. Uh, that's actually pretty discouraged because of more or less how challenging communication is in that context. It's raining, cars are going fast. They don't expect an individual to appear and then attempt conversation. And so we actually recommend more or less the opposite. Um, as soon as you see the headlights, get off the road a safe distance. And if you're going to illuminate, try to illuminate your own person so that they can see the human or the reflective vest. And uh, if you can light up yourself, that mitigates the most confusion, and that seems to be the best strategy. And a lot of folks enjoy making signs that they sort of put as warning, like further down the road. And the signs take a variety of forms and say a lot of things. Signs are fun to make, and they can sort of help to communicate. And if the signs can be permanent, that's the best piece. Because um, again, it's hard to notice a sign that you weren't expecting and haven't seen before on a rainy night in the middle of a commute. But the most important point is to not shine your headlamp at the cars. Don't blind anybody. Don't um, do everything you can to not be a hazard and get as far from the cars and the road as you can. Uh, signs come up every year, and it's an interesting conversation. People like to make them, and people like to argue against their efficacy, and also sometimes town officials like to argue against their legality. Um, a nice reflective sign permanently attached to a, a prominent road crossing. Uh, one, it spreads awareness of the amphibian migration. That is a tangible benefit. And two, it might actually encourage some folks to find a different road once they become more aware of what's going on and what they can do about it. Um, yeah, if you feel a desire to, go ahead and make a sign. And this is the data sheet. As for design, I feel that the sheet's a little cluttered and scary almost. Uh, really, it's only 5 or so different fields we're collecting. The temperature we're going out in, the overall like rain or the weather condition, the time of your survey. Uh, number of cars is an important detail, and then the quantity of amphibians. And the sheet also mentions the different species you'll find. And I think that list is cut off because we only find a fraction of the total statewide that exist. Put it a different way, Hartford only sees a fraction of the total state's amphibians. We rarely see Jeffersons, we rarely see blue spotteds. Uh, the main frogs we find are wood frogs and spring peepers versus they're a much longer list than that. If you are just getting into this, if you use the data sheet for a few times, you hopefully will start to memorize it, and that unlocks the notepad for you. And waterproof notepads exist, which feels really nifty when you're getting rained on. Um, Overall, the more quickly and the less effort you're putting into collecting data, the more in tune to the cars and the amphibians you'll be, and the more fun it is. So yeah, it's worth spending time staring at. And North Branch Nature Center has waterproof versions of this sheet, and likely Sustainable Woodstock could reach out and get a stack of those. And maybe it could exist at a local library or a centralized location for people to pick up. I don't know where that would be. Uh, I would also recommend just getting in touch with North Branch as an organization and seeing what that connection looks like and could lead to. Likely you already did something like that before this meeting, but maybe once you start collecting data, they'll have a different voice in that conversation. Um, this volunteer work is a lap-based activity. You're doing laps all night. And each time you do a lap of your transect, you're filling out a data sheet or collecting a new row of data on your notepad. And the total length of a transect is normally a quarter of a mile maximum. So it's not a super long walk, and that's by design. Um, I'd also be curious to see if you find any amphibian road crossings that extend beyond a quarter of a mile in Woodstock, because so far that's been rare. Been working with amphibians. The main thing is they absorb through their skin. They breathe through their skin. Their skin is permeable and fragile. And if there's anything like lotion or any chemicals existing on your skin while you're scooping them up, it will easily transmit. And so make sure your hands are clean. Like wash them and then put pond water all over your hands, and then they'll be nice and moist, which is actually ideal. But just make sure there's no lotion or sunscreen or any sort of stuff that could be absorbed off of your hands. Uh, Currently at Dartmouth, there's somebody studying the effects of road salt on specifically wood frogs. Wood frogs, they're often observed to be pretty bloated or just enlarged because of the road salt around here. And so this is extremely variable from one crossing to another. And depending on how close to a town center you are or a different piece of infrastructure, but make note of how the wood frogs are looking. Wood frogs are the middle picture, middle on the bottom. Uh, that picture appears to be mildly bloated. There's a black dot under the upper right forelimb. That's where the bloating would be observed. If you're new to this, the buckets will be a very helpful tool because spring peepers hop spotted salamanders, uh, they feel strange and surprisingly squishy, and um, that makes them a challenge at first to handle and to pick up because they wiggle and they're uh, they're good at getting out of your hands. So it takes a firm grip right behind the front legs of spotted salamanders. Saying that again, to pick up a yellow spotted salamander, you give a pinch right behind the front legs and hold firm and make note of the texture. And uh, once you make that pinch, it should stop moving. And it it takes getting used to, and it's an odd experience. But the spotted salamanders are the easiest of these to handle. And then wood frogs, um, I would recommend a cupping. This is ideal for wood frogs and peepers because both will actively attempt to hop out of your hands. And um, yeah, it's fun, but it's also distracting from when there's cars, and the hopping can happen at bad times. And uh, all these amphibians require a firm grip. So make sure your hands are clean, and especially be wary of the peepers because they move so fast. That's actually most of the training. And so we're doing pretty well on time. Describing some of the folks we actually encounter. Uh, there's a sequence to the amphibian migration depending on cold tolerance or how resilient the individual species are in cold weather. And if you read about wood frogs, they actually freeze solid in the winters, and their their winter adaptations are really interesting, and uh, they turn to ice cubes. And of all the critters featured here, they're the only ones that do that, at least to my knowledge, which involves putting a lot of sugar in the areas where they want to prevent ice crystals from forming. And then, uh, yeah, they can alter the freezing points of the critical locations in their body to keep them safe from ice crystals, which have stabbing tendencies. Uh, Second, following the wood frogs are the spring peepers. And so oftentimes on the first big nights, you'll see the wood frogs and then a horde of spring peepers that require the bucket. And if you're ever going to get overwhelmed, it's by the spring peepers. Uh, when I was leaving Cloudland Farm and the road was moving, it was covered in seemingly thousands of peepers. And it takes a lot of time to move that many peepers. And uh, it makes for a magical challenge. Uh, if you ever visit a vernal pool, you can pretty readily see the wood frog eggs and the spotted salamander eggs. And then the peeper eggs are more hidden in the reeds, just along the periphery. Uh, the salamander team does meetups every month, or we used to, and then for the last 6 months we've been slacking. But it looks like April 20th we'll be in the Hartford Town Forest visiting the biggest vernal pool in there, um, which beyond the species listed on this slide, it includes that vernal pool has been noted to have Jefferson salamanders, which exist seemingly all the towns around Hartford, but not in Hartford specifically. So Norwich has a good number of them. Woodstock has a chance of finding them. Uh, the key detail of this slide is keep a lookout for Jefferson salamanders because those are kind of rare. And if you find one, that would be exciting for at least me. And please send a note because that would be news. And when we found a Jefferson salamander in a vernal pool in Hartford, like one time, it made I think it got in the Valley News. Uh, so it was a significant event for science. Blue spotted salamanders are further away from my understanding. The range map appears to be uh, further north and more in the Champlain like basin area. It follows Lake Champlain down south and then for some reason extends into weird spots around New England. Yeah, and then Hartford is neglected. So if you want to see a strange, confusing range map, the blue spotted salamander range map is a great example of that. Plus, their breeding ecology involves kleptogenesis, which, from what I read, involves taking genetic material from other species, which I couldn't explain beyond that one sentence, which is a fun kind of befuddled to be in my perspective. Um, Eastern newts, that orange guy on the right, they're not going to breed. They're kind of like voracious predators, so they might be headed to vernal pools to go eat stuff, maybe. Uh, they also spend a lot of time just in moist, like under logs, and they dry out real quick. So if it's a dry day, they won't be adventuring. So the reason we might encounter them is just because it's wet. It's when they're adventuring anyway. And so we just happen to run into them. Um, so Eastern newts will show up, but they're not a part of this narrative of spring migratory breeding ecology. They're just randomly kind of photobombing. Uh, yeah, and spotted salamanders, they're a mole salamander. They live in kind of the repurposed homes of other tunneling organisms. I guess that includes moles, but they live in dense forests throughout the year in the tunnel systems around tree roots. And if you're a gardener, there's a pretty common experience of digging one of these guys up or finding them in the little rock wall next to your garden. But yeah, they're about the size of a Snickers bar. They have charisma and uh, hopefully next year, if I give this presentation, I'm able to describe their species relationship to the blue spotted salamanders. Yellow spotteds, I think are one of the species that the kleptogenesis involves. Uh, I can really only dance around how interesting that is. I can't explain it. I'm sorry. Uh, we do have green frogs and American bullfrogs, and they look kind of larger. And if you ever see a frog with another frog in its mouth, it's a bullfrog. Um, I've only seen one of the green frogs in Hartford. That's a lesser encountered species for this project. Uh, they're kind of hard to ID relative to wood frogs. And for a long while, I had this photo and thought it was a wood frog. And it took several years and the right audience and company to be correcting that. Uh, Noting the time, I'd be happy to transition to Q&A, or I could keep listing off fun facts about the creatures you'll encounter.
Yeah, why don't we switch over and see if we've got questions? Um, so yeah, if you all want to, you can put your questions in the chat. If you're not seeing the chat on the side of your screen, go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, click the chat button, and it should pop up on the side there. And then you can enter your question in the little bottom section. And we do have some suggestions on locations in the chat, but I think I'm gonna start with questions first and then circle back to the locations. Okay. So first question we have from Laura is, do you have to be out all night for the data to be worth collecting? Is there a minimum amount of time that's worth documenting?
Uh, I would say a single transect or a single data sheet is worth collecting. But generally, it takes less than half an hour to walk one of these road crossings from start to finish. And even one data sheet represents a snapshot of what's going on there. Um, Plus, just getting out there can confirm or deny whether the spot is active. Um, at this stage for Woodstock's effort, I would say go out for any amount of time. And then, yeah,
Great. Thank
some nights,
Oh, go ahead, Ben.
um, I guess the time of the activity changes from night to night depending on how long it's raining. So some nights it's only active for an hour and it's only worth going out for an hour. But there are some folks that seemingly do this like pre-sunrise. So any part of the night is worth going out for.
Great. Thank you. Um, so Linda asks, what do you think about us advocating for culverts too?
Um, I think it's the town of Moncton, Vermont that has the best example of a culvert currently. Also, like Amherst, Massachusetts has a super impressive one that is glorious. Uh, Culverts are extremely effective at mitigating the roadkill. And if you have robust enough data on a specific road crossing, it's worthwhile pursuing that. It would free up volunteers indefinitely from that location. It would prevent having to close down that road, which would uh, remove logistical hurdles and maybe make people's travel easier, hopefully. Um, the culvert is a great idea, and if you can't take that step, then the detour is a fantastic strategy in its place. And likely there's a sequence involved there. If you're doing the detours, you can be doing detours while you're working toward the culvert while you're fundraising because they do cost some money. I do think the culverts that currently exist were pretty, their funding schemes were kind of wide and all inclusive, organizational funding, private donors, a wide grassroots effort. Um, so likely if that was pursued, uh, the Conservation Commission, Sustainable Woodstock, maybe even local schools would be very important players in that conversation. And uh, in Hartford, Lily Pond would be a fantastic place for a culvert. And that would be a lovely step to take.
Great. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? We can also take a look on the map at some of these locations that have been suggested. So I don't know, Ben, do you want to, I mean, I can put these on my screen if you want me to share, if we want to take a look at them. Let's see here.
I think I just figured out how to pull the chat up, so I might be able to find the questions.
I just found the coordinates. Okay, here we go. Let's see.
Yeah, I have to say, describing a spotted salamander as like the size of a Snickers bar is one of the most like accurate descriptions I've ever heard in terms of like the feel of your hand. I feel like I grew up in Vermont, but I never saw them until I started doing road crossings. And you think of salamanders as these light and almost dainty things, and then you pick one up, and it is like a Snickers bar. That's a very good description. So thank you.
Their size makes buckets a good idea. You can really only hold one.
Also fair. I've never done it with a bucket before. It's a good idea.
All right, here we go. So this was the suggested location.
Looks like a good one.
Yeah, which Christina's still on. So we could have her unmute because she's the one who suggested it. I assume it's across the College Hill Road, not the Twin Ponds Way. Although maybe, I don't know.
Right. Let's see. Yeah, Christina, would you like to be unmuted? I can go ahead and do that. Let's see here.
Not to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious now.
So from a
Yes.
visual, it looks like high possibility. I'm curious if we've ever seen amphibians there. Has anyone ever scouted that location?
Hold on a second. Just takes a moment for them to unmute. So there we go.
There.
Hello.
Yeah,
Oh,
so across College Hill is what I was thinking. I have only been there this spring so far, but I know the homeowner said that they do hear peepers and bullfrogs through the summer. So that's the extent of my intel so far.
that
Right.
sounds like a great blue mark, and then very worth someone actually going out there to scout. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone have any other questions? You can go ahead and enter those into the chat if you do. And while we're waiting to see if anyone has any last questions, I'll just say again, our big Earth Day celebration is coming up on April 23rd. It will be on Zoom. It's with Reverend Mariama White Hammond, who is just an amazing, inspirational person. And so I hope you all will join us for that. And if you're not able to join us on the night of, but you'd like to see a recording of the event, you can sign up and we will send out a recording to everyone afterwards. So, all right, looks like we got all the questions. Ben, did you want to share anything about the mycology aspect of your team's work? In case anyone wants to join you for that as well.
Um, I mentioned the monthly meetups earlier. We do guided nature walks at different trails throughout the Upper Valley, usually with a topic expert and a phenology-based topic of some sort. Uh, we spend a lot of time focusing on fungi during the summer months, like July and August. Uh, it's been all about birding lately. And then this month is vernal pool focused because it's vernal pool season. Um, those meetups were just an outreach tool. That was an excuse for us to talk about amphibians outside of the amphibian season. Uh, it turned into a nice community, and there's a fair batch of regulars that show up pretty often, and we're all very nerdy and very proud of it. And it's a warm and fun time. But my email is Hartford Salamander Team at Gmail, and if you send a note, you can join the email list, and you'll get invites to all those. And there's a Facebook page, and uh, If Woodstock already has guided nature walks, I would love to hear about them because you have cool trails. I don't know if anybody's doing mushroom walks already, but if so, please invite me.
Not that
Yeah.
I know about.
Yeah, the only nature walks I know of are at the national park, but I don't know about mushrooms, so we could definitely try to get one.
That would be fun. Yep.
I found a wasp nest slime mold over the weekend.
Nice.
I don't even know what that is, but that's cool. Oh, Laura had a question here. Is Woodstock blank because it's mostly along a river?
Mm.
Uh, Woodstock is blank because I lived in Hartford when I started this project. Uh, Also because I was very promptly kicked off the listserv.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Sounds about right.
it's great to meet you guys, and thank you so much for this invitation.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So I'm going to send out a follow-up email to everyone. I'll include these links that we put in the chat for like the liability waiver, the map, all of that good stuff. Also, I would love to get details from anyone who is open to having their contact information shared amongst the group that was trained. I won't automatically share your personal info, but if you would like to be on a list that's shared, you can either put that in the chat right now, maybe your name and email, um, and or feel free to just reply to the program's email that I sent out today with the Zoom link and give me those details, and I will put that together for everybody. All right, thank you so much, you guys. Thanks, Ben. That was a really great talk with lots of information, and I'm excited that we have some new amphibian crossing guards for Woodstock now.
Thank you so much, and have a great night.
Thanks, Ben.